Welcome to the Baobab sessions as it is. Today I am joined by Chael, one of my fabulous guests on this season. Chael, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
Thank you, Tatenda. Hello, I'm Chael. I am an artist of all sorts. I just enjoy making art, and I'm very, very excited to talk about art and how it affects the world we live in with Tatenda today.
Okay, so as an artist, you obviously experience non-duality, and you experience it as a very real and sensory experience.
Yeah.
If you had to introduce yourself beyond the labels of like what you do and even your name to someone who is bearing witness to you, because I am bearing witness to you, to your life, to your aliveness, to your presence in this moment, what would you say?
I think first and foremost, I'd say I'm a student, because I feel I'm constantly looking to learn, and it's not knowing something that excites me. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the nicest things I feel about art is there's always more to learn about any artwork. You can look at one artwork a million different times and still something new will say about it, even if it's just the artwork itself, it's just a pinprick. Mm-hmm. There's a million different ways to look at it. And that's so again, at the end of the day, I'd say a student. I mean, I'd like to think of some big word or concept to maybe describe it, but I think, honestly, I must say I'm a student because there's still so much to learn. I think that's maybe why I love music so much, because I grew up with a family who were all artists, but not musicians. My mom was a visual artist, and she, with her business partner, Carl Moritz, started an art company from the ground up, and that I've been really thankful to, have grown up, and obviously growing up with artists is not, it's not normal, but there's a lot you can learn from it. And they've always loved music, but they never made music, or we never had like a guitar or a piano or anything like that growing up. But we'd always listen to music all the time. And I think for me, from a very young age, I started writing down songs and started singing. But I was never, I grew up with two sisters, and both my sisters had such beautiful high voices, so whenever I started singing, it was a bit weird, because I'd come in and it didn't quite sound right. So for quite a while, I think I didn't really push on that note. But then towards the beginning of high school, there was something that was like really aching at me to do something about it, because I didn't know any singers, I didn't know anybody, and I had all this material that I'd been writing down for a while. And just as high school came to an end, I was lucky enough to meet Mika, who's the bassist in our band, and we started the band together. And that has really been like a lifesaver for me, just being able to explore that medium, and be a student to that way of art.
Okay, so a big part of your identity is being an artist.
Exactly.
A lot of people speak about the process of becoming as a process of being and then meeting a world that has expectations based on how you identify, based on how you look, based on how you sound, based on where you were born. Have you ever had experiences of becoming that were kind of jarring for you, that made you feel like, wait a minute, this is how I feel inside, but this is what you're telling me I am, and it feels like policing?
100%. I've never fit very comfortably into the schooling system, and that's nothing against any of the teachers that have taught me or anything. But I would say sometimes I think we've got almost a too standardized approach of teaching and dealing with things, because there's so many different types of education, and if we try to standardize everyone, it stops people from realizing their potential in other mediums, because sometimes you can be very limited in one medium, but that like shoots you off in another thing. It's like people who have low EQs often have very high IQs. There's a lot of my friends who are autistic and on the spectrum, and they've got a low functioning EQ, but their IQ is much higher than mine. And they can understand certain maths and physics problems that are completely blind to us. But to them, that's the only stuff that they can really see. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I feel that's sometimes where I felt down. And just also, I think I I wouldn't necessarily say. I mean, I think it was always very surprising to me that everybody feeds into it. But I mean, not everybody, but what I mean is majority of people. We won't, are not going to complain or not going to argue about certain things. Even if it does negatively affect them. And that I'd always open my mouth up about something, which often got me in trouble a lot of times during school. But I'd rather, openly speak how I am and see how the world reacts to that than have never opened my mouth, and just, take things. Because I feel like for me, the way that I learn a lesson is through a mistake, and that's why school has not worked for me, because not necessarily not worked for me, but it won't work for every person, is because school doesn't want you to make a mistake. They want you to have a formula where you get the right answer and you've never made the mistake. So by the time you're just placing things, you don't know why you're placing them, but you're just placing them. But whereas when you make a mistake, that's when you know why you're placing it. Your mistake. I actually wrote another song, which is one of the lines is my next mistake is my next lesson. I expect change. That's why I'm not guessing, because I don't. I'm not trying to guess what today holds. I'm watching as the future unfolds, because you can't try and predict these things. And lessons, if you're scared of making a mistake, you're scared of learning. And I feel like that's one of the biggest contradictories in science. People forget that chemistry comes from alchemy and alchemistry, and what we, artists and stuff describe as magic. I don't think that magic is not real for a second. I think it is very real, and I think people just completely misinterpret it. Science is magic. What you would call a doctor and a scientist is often, what we would have called wizards back in the day. And I think the difficulty is with how the education system is laid out, is it's made that all the people that are going into these professions of the sciences, a lot of these people are very much structured on having a direct answer, and that answer has to be concrete. But that is against everything in science, because science throughout the generations and years always proves itself wrong until it gets to a better version of the picture.
Right.
That should be the main objective in science. But a lot of times, instead, you have these people forcing a narrative of, oh no, we have this information, that's it, you should learn it, instead of saying, well, why? What if I don't? What happens then? You know what I mean?
What's interesting about that is speaking about how the education system fails people, and how it still does. I can't say it serves to the extent that we are given a passport to have access to this world around us.
Yes.
But it fails people because it almost feels like the education system is a way of contracting our capacity to vision and explore so that we fit in. Would you say that you possess different kinds of intelligence that you wish were valued more so they could have been cultivated?
100%. I think I found when I never knew I was at all intelligent whatsoever until I think I was in grade 7, and we had a leadership camp, and all of a sudden we had all these practical tasks to do, but the practical tasks you had to use your brain to think about. And I was just leading my team through it because I played all these sort of puzzles and stuff when I was younger. I never really thought about it much. But now all of a sudden I was doing it and our team came first, and the guy was saying, oh, you're a clever guy, you're a smart kid. And I'm like, I don't know what that means. I'm not, because for me I'd never been, I was never got good marks. I think the only time I got good marks was when it was for one term in primary school, because they were going to try to send me to a special needs school for dyslexia, because I have dyslexia. And they said that, I couldn't fit in the normal working environment, that I'd have to be a year behind and all of that. And I think what they realized quite quickly is because the next term my marks went from basically failing to just below distinction. I think it was a lot less to do with my ability to learn, but more to do with my ability to need to learn, my wanting to learn, because I feel like that's very important. And sometimes the education system or teachers look over that, and they just say, oh, a kid who doesn't want to learn is a kid who doesn't want to learn. But often it's not that the kid doesn't want to learn, it's that the kid doesn't want to learn at school.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I feel like that's one of the big things is we often think that, education only happens at school. But in fact, I would say not even the majority of your education in life happens at school. Important education about the system that you live in and the people that are around you happens in school.
Mm-hmm.
But I think just general life lessons, majority of them come out of school. They come from, making those mistakes amongst people that have already made those mistakes. So those people can help you, along a journey. And yeah, a lot of that sometimes is neglected in school, but not in, all schools. I mean, I've had my fair share of great teachers, but it doesn't take, one great teacher is not enough to fix a whole system, you know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
You spoke about something so interesting even before, is magic.
Yes.
Magic is something that I'm so curious about, because I wonder if magic is our word for the unknown. And you brought together the relationship between science and magic, and how, human beings kind of say that magic, we walk away from magic and we run to science, but science is magic in and of itself. I really wonder what your definition of magic is, and if you have had experiences with magic in your own life.
Definitely, yeah. I think magic, I definitely have had experiences with magic in my own life. I think it's, as you were just saying, it's relation to the unknown, and that's why I feel like it's very hard to describe, and that's why I feel like the only way that magic makes sense in fictional stories is to make things that aren't real.
Right.
Because it's the best description for something that's impossible to describe. Mm-hmm. It's stuff that does exist in our reality, but the whole point is that we can't describe it. It's like, for me, why magic comes in is one of the biggest questions is why. And I feel like that is a question that can never be answered no matter the context. Mm-hmm. Because when you ask a question why, it just keeps going down. Because you can say why, okay, so say if I say, why is this a tree? Mm-hmm. Because you can say, well, because it came from a seed of another tree, and then I can ask, why did that happen? Mm-hmm. And then you can tell me why that happened. And then I'll ask, why did that happen? And the thing is, there's no reason. Reason is a very human thing. Reason only has context in our structures once we've said, okay, this is happening, and this is happening, and this is happening. But in the broader spectrum of things, it's not reason. It's like, I think one of the biggest things that I've realized recently with coming into balance with nature and everything is that nature is not balanced.
Okay.
And that's something that, I kind of put me off for a second, is this, because I think yin and yang is very important, and the idea of balance between those two energies and, dark and light and, creation and destruction. I wouldn't necessarily say good and evil, because either side could be seen as good and evil. But I would say that the balance of it is that there is never a balance, mm-hmm. that you'll never find an area anywhere in our reality where light and dark are at a 50-50. You know what I mean? That just doesn't happen. There's areas of vast darkness, there's areas of vast lightness, of brightness, and that's a very interesting thing. But again, with magic, I don't think I can properly describe it, but I think magic is just knowing things that don't have any relevance to your physical, place and time, but they have every relevance to what's going on underneath that. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of the times what can be magic is when we look at things like hypnosis, and when we look at what those are doing is, on the surface level, they're helping rewire your mind, to think differently, to pick up things so that you can start picking up new habits. But below that, what they're also doing is, I think, going into this idea of having a multiverse.
Right.
Because I feel like what people miss when you have a multiverse is that all these multiverses are connected. It's not you're one of the multiverses and the rest are all separate to you. No. All the multiverses are connecting. And I feel like there's a point at which you can actually choose which direction you're going in on a particular multiverse. Mm-hmm. And one of the interesting things that I found, me and my friends were having a conversation, and this all of a sudden came up, and we started talking about it. If the multiverse exists, anything that you want to do you've already done, you are doing, and you will do.
Ooh.
In the multiverse. That's a fact. And so why can't you do it in this reality? And that is my biggest motivator, is knowing that in the multiverse, it has happened, it is happening, and it will happen. And I live by those 3 sentences. You know, when I'm trying to do something or trying to get past something, I know it has happened, it is happening, and it will happen. You know, and there's a darkness with that as well, because understanding that means that the second you start perceiving things on a negative thing, it doesn't stop there, or that's going to reflect the same way. You know, so you have to be very careful when it comes to manifestations and things, because if you start manifesting, you don't stop. You know what I mean? It's not like I manifest something good for me and then I'm done. You know what I mean? Manifesting it's a way of being. You can unplug from it or you can plug in. But once you're plugged in, you're plugged in. You know what I mean?
Do you know, when you said that, that is something that just came to me, was if we are to live in the realm of being absolute consciousness that directs its will in the material realm, we have to do it from a place of conscience, right? And when you said that, you know, everything that you could even dream of doing, you have done in the multiverse, right? You are doing in the multiverse. It brings to question, because this is a really interesting way of like, where do we live from? You know, and I'm interested to learn that from you, is where do you live from?
That's something I find very interesting, and because I think when I was younger, I used to have very weird feelings of not necessarily disassociation, but I think it's something maybe we all feel at some points, but this feeling like what you're experiencing is more of a display of reality than the actual reality. It's like when you look at, like, you know, a 3D object in 2D, you only see that flat surface. So sometimes I used to feel like, you know, I was this huge giant and I was taking these massive steps across, like, you know, universal planes, but meanwhile I'm just a tiny little kid taking footsteps. You know, and you know, most people would say, oh, you've got a very wild imagination, you know, none of that's happening. And that is true, none of that is happening, but in your mind it is happening. And I think must be some sort of connection to that, because, I don't feel that this is the only plane that we all exist on.
Right.
You know, I feel like there's more planes to it. Not that I would know, you know, anything about that, but I just, you know, intuitively, I think it's also that same feeling, you know, when you can communicate with somebody without saying anything. You know, you're with a friend, something happens, and often it's with sort of like funny things or something like that, where you'll look at somebody and then you both just start laughing, you know, and that's a very been a very curious thing for me, you know, throughout my whole life. It's just, you know, understanding those things.
We have so many words for trauma and traumatic experiences, but we don't speak about the trauma that people experience on a spiritual level. Right?
Very true.
And I don't know if you have anything to unpack there, like to speak about that spiritual trauma, things that happen where we don't have convenient words, where psychology may not necessarily be able to meet us on the occasions of what we are experiencing.
Definitely. And psychology as well, I find that very interesting, because there's lots of pros and cons with psychology. I think psychology is a very important movement, but I think that there are also, on the other side, there's a lot of, you know, psychologists that are doing more damage than good, you know, with, you know, just needing to prescribe and diagnose a specific criteria. You know, I know friends that have been misdiagnosed as, you know, ADD or ADHD and being put on Adderall and stuff, but meanwhile they actually just have Asperger's syndrome. And those you cannot treat with they're different things. You can, you know, they can be co-linked, but they're not the same thing. Whereas you also have people in psychology like Jung, you know, and I feel like Jung has done some great stuff, and I personally have related to a lot of his work, just when he talks about the ego and the shadow, and my favorite thing is the collective unconscious, and we've been talking a bit about that as well. And one of my favorite things that he said, I think it was Jung, to find the self, what the actual self is, you have to find the not self.
Right.
And that like impacted me hugely, because I had never thought of trying to find or trying to understand what's not me. I've just been trying to find myself in this world, you know what I mean? And then so to stop and take a moment and go, okay, what's not me? that's just like, it gives me goosebumps even right now. Like, I'm like, it's just, and I feel like that, again, has to do with spiritual trauma, as you were saying. And there's very few words that we can use to describe that. But there is, and it's hard to, I feel like the best, I feel like, some of the best ways for spiritual trauma to actually go through healing is through it not directly mentioning anything, but just focusing on the energy of healing. And I think we can see this with all types of art. And I think that's why art is such an important thing. When you go into a hospital, and this is something that I noticed, like, from a young age, when you go into a hospital, everywhere on the walls you see artworks.
Right.
Especially like in the ICU sections, you see these beautiful paintings, and that is, you could say, oh, they're just trying to make the hallways look nice or something, but it's got a lot more to do than that. It's emotions, it's affecting these people, there's energy in those paintings. I think when it comes to art, without a doubt, I would say, all art comes from the unconscious, but art can come from either the subjective or the objective unconscious, and I think both of those are very valid. But I think, especially in today's generation, most art, I'd say the majority, comes from the subjective unconscious. And I think that's really nice because it can be personal and it can put you into really personalized situations. But sometimes those situations can get overly personalized to a point where, as an audience member, you can't envision yourself in that reality. You more just feel like somebody's showing off.
I wonder, in your own work, you say that you're disinterested in art that is subjective and is self-indulgent, and you're more interested in art that can translate to other people and also it tells the truth of an experience. But the reality of the situation is, every time that we as creatives create art and we express, we're doing it through our voice, through our vessel. Yeah. So there is an element of subjectivity.
100%. Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned that. Because there is definitely an element of subjectivity. It can never be truly objective. But what I'm talking about is more, less, and that is something that I've pondered myself, through trying to really get to terms with that. But it's, so it's like using, so subjective unconscious or art that's based around that would be using the external world to recreate an image of what's inside. Whereas writing from the objective unconscious is where you use your internal world to create a world of what you're experiencing outside. So the one is like, going in, the other one's going out. And, as I said, both are just valid, and both are both subjective and objective in a sense, because they're both happening objectively and subjectively. But the one is viewing the objective and the one is viewing the subjective. They're both coming from a subjective viewpoint and an objective viewpoint in a way, but the one is looking in, the one's looking out.
Right.
And I wouldn't necessarily say, I would say yes. Personally, I prefer not to write from that, side of things. And I have written plenty songs and I've done plenty artworks, that come from that side, and that are for me in that sense. But always, for me personally, time and time again, whether it's got to do with wanting to escape, or whether it's just got to do with wanting to understand my reality better, I generally prefer the songs where I'm writing about a context or a state that either I'm not in, or I won't be in, or is just something that maybe affects everyone, but it doesn't affect us all in the same way, you know what I mean?
Okay.
So I'm writing about how it affects me, but I'm writing about something that affects everyone, if that makes sense, you know what I mean? I'm not writing about how I affect everyone or how I affect things. I'm writing how things affect me, if that makes sense.
And I understand that. I understand that as your expression as an artist, and I appreciate that, because maybe the beauty of art is that not everybody is going to play that role. And we don't have to.
Exactly.
I want to change directions completely. And I want to speak about how you personally identify.
Okay.
And what that means.
Yeah, okay, so personally, I identify as a human being. That's the long story short. And although even lower than that, I would say is I actually wrote a song about this. Is I am universe, and that is one of the. It's almost like a healing mantra for me to say be universe. And I wrote a song about that. And one of the lines is, "You are dark and you are light, blinding black and burning white. The ocean's wet and desert's dry. Southern smiles and tears from eyes. You dine with death and live with life. With every breath you try to fight to claim this death and asking why, but you can't see past your horizon." And then so the universe is saying, we are universe. Everything is the same age. We all are the same thing, experiencing itself. Matter cannot be created or destroyed. Thus, reincarnation is definitely real, because everything is being repurposed. And not only that, but you've never arrived. You'll never leave. There's that huge sense of wanting to know what happened previously, and really a huge excitement for what's going to happen. Instead of that mortal way of looking at it, when you look at it from a mortal perspective of us being human, you get that birth and death, But when you look at it from the perspective of being the universe, you just look at it as exciting changes of, oh, I'm this now, you know what I mean? I'm going to be that, and that gives a more exciting, feel for me personally on it. But back to that. So I'm human, and when it comes to my gender, or I think less so is I'm they them. So I'm non-binary. I don't like to identify with gender, but at the same time I'm not fussy with it. I'm not personal. I've got a lot of friends who still refer to me as he, or because I've got a deep voice and I seem quite masculine. And I also don't like to go along the lines of denying my sex or anything like that. And I'm not, and not to everybody can do and should be able to do how they do whatever they feel. But I feel at the same time nobody should be putting boundaries on anyone. So I should be allowed to call myself non-binary, and I also feel that somebody else has the right to call me a man. And the reason why is because I think misgendering is something that happens regardless of whether you have a lucid form of gender. I've been mistaken for a woman multiple times at a club. If I have my jacket around my waist or something, people just see long hair and they think, oh, that's a woman. I'm not a woman. You know what I mean? And that's got nothing to do with, whether, I've changed my gender or not. That's just something that happens to everybody in everyday life. So I don't feel like, if somebody misjudges my gender or mistakes me, I'm not offended at all. In fact, most of the time I won't mention it. And the only reason why, and I respect people who do mention it, and I think that's great that they stand up for themselves, but the only reason I don't mention it is to keep it for me. You know what I mean? It's like, when you have got a lucky charm, and you don't want other people to hold that lucky charm, or to, because it's taking it out of the context with you. So that's how I kind of feel about it, because it's more about my mental space and how I view myself as a human, so that I can, again, of putting yourself in other people's shoes, again, it makes it easier for me to be more lucid in a situation where then feel like I have to play a role. You know what I mean? I don't like being in situations and feeling like I have to play a specific role. I like being in situations and trying to, like everybody else, one by one, figure it out. But sometimes it makes it difficult if you're in like a situation where, as you've been born a man, you have to do such and such. You've been born a woman, you have to do such and such. And really those boundaries shouldn't be put on us, and they're not put on us by the universe, what I mean? They're put on us by ourselves as a species, and that's the only reason for me I like to identify, as just a human being, because it takes all of that away. Human is one word is good enough to describe me, you know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
So when you say that, because when you're speaking about identifying as non-binary, for me, I also hear that you identify as universal.
That's very interesting. Yeah.
And I don't know if you, that's what I'm hearing, that I am eternal, I am universal, I am transient and permanent. It's like you're open to the experience of what this expression of you is in Akasha. So people who've tried to negatively impact me, I have gone to the extent of doing thought experiments, meditating, researching, and all of that. The conclusion that I got to is because I am not them, because I do not normalize what they normalize, accept what they accept,
Yes.
deny what they deny, even in my own tension or my fallibility, seek to use harm as a way of regulating my internal reality, I will never understand their actions.
Exactly.
Their reality and their system of meaning is different from mine. And it's learning how to have an indifference that is not disregard,
Yes.
but that it is. Because I struggled with it is for a long time. But then when I realized, wait a minute, I can say something is and trust my innate sense of morality and say it is wrong, but I give it no more energy, fear, strength, power, because it is innately weak. And that is where I came to, and that was my conclusion. I mean, seeing it as it is and experiencing it as it is are different, right? And for me, there's this awareness that when subjective reality gains critical mass, it is then defined as objective truth.
Yeah.
It does not take power away from an idea that exists in your mind or in my mind for me to say it's what I believe is my subjective truth.
Yeah.
Because so what?
Exactly.
Because even objectivity we've broken past this is the truth, this is objective. No one cares in reality,
Definitely.
We can see it as a condition of this age.
Yeah, definitely as a condition, especially because I think we're very dead set on, facts. And that's, again, when we go back to science and the hypocrisy of science, it's that thing of this is how things are. We know it, the numbers add up. We're not going to take a look at this other information until that other information turns out to be the right information. And it's the same thing with that personal thing of, needing things to be right and wrong and needing to validation of knowing that you're right or wrong. It's because what almost feels worse than being right or wrong is to be neither. And that's the fact, is that you are neither. It's like, if you ever had a fight with your friend and it's so uncomfortable because you guys both know neither of you are right or wrong. You know what I mean? They had their reasons, you had your reasons. And it's going to be even harder to end this fight now because we both know that neither of us are right or wrong in this situation. And that's like, that is one of the most beautiful but also ugly things about this world that we live in.
No, but that's the thing is like I struggle with that because animals are animals, right? They kill for food. They don't kill for fun or pleasure.
Yeah, well, sometimes though.
Which ones?
Lions have done it before. Dolphins do it, especially killer whales.
Really?
Yes. So killer whales will they'll hunt sharks for no other reason, just eat their liver.
Isn't that hunger?
No, because they a lot of the time, sometimes they won't even eat them, and it's not particularly nutritional. They just do it for fun. Dolphins as well. Dolphins do all sorts of weird stuff. They snort they inhale pufferfish. Because when they inhale them, they scare them and then they puff up, and then when they puff up, they inhale them because there's a chemical that they secrete that gets them high, which is very weird to think about. Yeah, and I just remember the only lion situation I remember hearing about that was I think the Mpunga brothers or something. There's these lion brothers in this national park. There were two of them, and they just got so big, and their pride was just so huge that they started killing other lions, and not for the sake of eating them, but just for they were called herd killers because they would go and kill all these other herds of lions, and then they would also kill animals for no reason. They killed a crocodile, a hippo, a giraffe, and those are just not things you usually see lions kill. Lions can, a pack of lions can kill those things, but we see two lions going killing those things, you think, oh, that's not for, you know.
I mean, that is interesting because it humbles me.
Yeah.
Because I was about to make an essentialist argument about if we don't see it in nature,
where does it come from?
Where does it come from? But we do see it in nature, and it's under certain conditions.
Yeah,
so it's something we've been able to do.
We actually should learn that from nature, as because it's probably easier to see what conditions it happens in those, you know, in there, and then we can apply it in our circumstance, because I'm sure some of those relations will be the same, you know, as to what conditions cause, you know.
I mean, that would be interesting, because if we see what conditions cause lions to become homicidal, we can understand the human homicidal impulse, and therefore guard against it, or even educate against it.
Exactly.
So preventative measures as opposed to corrective measures.
Definitely, I think that is the more important thing at the end of the day. Is I think because it's the same thing if you go back to people who are psychopaths and sociopaths.
Right.
There are a lot of functional psychopaths and sociopaths in society. And a lot that know that they're psychopaths and sociopaths, and I think knowing is probably the healthiest thing that you could do for yourself, is knowing that you have these predispositions, because then it's less of a stigmatism of having them, it's about how to deal with them, you know what I mean? And that is something I feel like even for myself holds relevance, because I feel like had I just been in a slightly different position, or had I just been in, you know, these few things went bad, I don't feel like I'd ever be a person to hurt anybody else, but I definitely feel like I could have hurt myself numerous times. In fact, you know, and I have tried to in the past, but I think also just understanding that, you know, I do have certain problems with the way that my mind works, and one of them is being, you know, depression, but I don't like to talk about that too much, because it's chronic depression, so it's not the same as a manic depression. Because I feel like manic depression is the type of depression that you should more focus on on medicating, because manic depression you don't know when that's going to erupt, and when it does erupt you can't control yourself. It's just an overwhelming feeling. But whereas chronic depression is something my dad also has had, it's not the same thing. It's an everyday thing. It's how you feel. You know what I mean? It's a point of like, thinking, not, you know, like there's, maybe this sounds bad, but there's a, you know, a lot of times I don't want to be me. You know what I mean? And I don't feel very comfortable being me. But knowing that also makes me feel more comfortable.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Okay. Well, I mean, knowing that those are feelings that I'm having as opposed to my route in life. You know what I mean? Because you can wake up and have the feeling, oh, I want to kill myself. You know what I mean? But if you know that that's a feeling, and that you can get past that feeling, it makes it a lot easier than thinking, oh, this is the journey I have. This is what I must do, because that's the person I am. You know what I mean? And that is just something that I've had to confront with, because I have had those thoughts. You know, and it is something that happens. As I say, it's not something that comes or goes. It's just something that's there. You know what I mean? And I also hate to put that on other people. And you know, and it's the worst thing of, you know, being in a down state. And that's why I've tried my best to not to, you know, because I wouldn't want to medicate myself, because then I would feel like I can't exist being the natural version of me.
Okay.
You know what I mean? That's why I wouldn't want to medicate myself, because I want to feel like I can cope, you know, being who I am. You know what I mean? Not without having to. And yes, you know, I'm sure, I think it is important, you know, all sorts of substances, you know, I'm not, you know, free, not that I don't use any substances, but just that I prefer. At this point I'll tell you guys.
No, continue.
No. But yeah, I just feel, knowing is the next step to, you know, living with your condition, no matter what it is, no matter whether it's a version of depression, whether it's a version of bipolar, whether it's schizophrenia, whether it's, you know, psychopathy. Knowing the cards that you've been dealt, or, you know, just the structure of where your body's at, can help you hugely because, I feel like if we put it into that, the worst case scenario, I would say is maybe somebody who debated either with, who's psychopathic or somebody who's schizophrenic. But both of those things can be dealt with in a way where it doesn't harm anybody, because you can have, hugely valuable psychopaths to society that just need a structure that they can fit by and that they can constantly push themselves where they're feeling like it's competitive. I think that's one of the most important things for psychopaths. As long as they've got something competitive going on, they'll be fine. That's their ground. They don't really feel things like we do. They feel things in terms of competitions and they're doing good for themselves.
Okay, but I have to speak about this as, from my perspective, mental illness is a construction of the present day.
Okay.
So society is in a particular condition and we resist against other people displaying different types of realities.
I do agree with you. Yeah, that is, okay.
So beneath a depressed state, in my experience, is a lot of anger. Underneath that anger, maybe a sense of injustice, maybe resentment, maybe a lot of things that were like stuffed into a bottle, and because it couldn't explode, it imploded.
Yeah, I get what you're saying there. I think definitely, again, as you're saying, that both exist. I think, and again, I was thinking about this while I was saying the thing is, I don't think anybody is directly 100% any type of mental illness, and I do feel like it goes hugely back to, those things of nature vs nurture, and a lot of it I do feel we should stop. There is no, I think the biggest thing to get to is that there is no normal state of consciousness.
Thank you.
Yes, that is it. And that is something that we can debate over and over again, but I will 100%, there's no normal state of consciousness, and that's something so difficult to understand, especially as a kid. As a kid growing up, that is the biggest mind fuck of being an adult, is realizing no one's actually normal. You're never going to meet a normal person. Everybody's got a weird, unique issue, and you just get more and more used to dealing and get more and more used to engaging with each of these unique issues, but they're all unique. There's no such thing as normal, and that's a beautiful thing, and I think something that should be spoken about more. And yes, will definitely help with people's mental states and removing the stigmatism, of saying this person is a this, as opposed to they've gone through something. Because, and again, it goes back to the thing of saying, if we can all put ourselves in each shoe, then surely you can get a person out of those shoes. You know what I mean? If someone's in a bad place and they've just got they're walking in the wrong side of town, you can get them out of there. You know what I mean, mentally. And that's maybe one of the best ways of looking at it.
Okay, so one of the thoughts I had with everything is you show this wisdom, and this wisdom to examine light and darkness. And there's something about your neutrality that almost, it shakes me at my core, because I've had to take a very strong position against harm and harm causing. I find that ambiguity almost leaves room in my soul for the places where I was afraid. Does that make sense?
Definitely, yeah.
So I feel like I appreciate what you're saying, and I appreciate that wisdom, especially the examination of light and dark. And I love how even in your constitution of it, you don't seem to be a person who advocates for harm at all.
Never. But again, I go back to the thing of I'm a person, and it can be mildly annoying even for myself sometimes. But I'm a person who I'm undecided, and I will remain undecided, because I feel like the only constant in life is change. So the only constants that I can accept is change. Right. For me personally. But with that, you contradict yourself. You will contradict yourself, and it puts you in the ability to be able to empathize with people who you do not relate to or you do not like. And that is one of the most difficult things, is and I had a therapist who really helped me get over this and deal with this at the time, is because when I was like going into, like, I think it was like the middle years of high school, I think I was in grade 10 or 11, I was so emotionally conflicted with the environment that I'd been met with, because I come from a co-ed school, primary school, Emiratia primary school, which was, great for me. I mean, I was a naughty kid, but it wasn't bad. But then going into a high school where it was all boys and the energy was just completely different, and it was all about masculinity. And I got bullied by my own teachers. It was that bad, and so I had huge, conflicts with understanding that I'm that, I'm one of these things. I am a man, essentially, and I have to be this, and not wanting to be that, you know what I mean? And finding the difficulty of drawing the line of what is you, what is not you, what you can tolerate, what you can't tolerate, and then what the universe does and doesn't do are two very different things, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I had to make a separation. I had to stop and go, okay, universally I accept these things, but fundamentally as a human, I don't agree with that. And it goes back to that thing of understanding, empathizing, and agreeing. Just because I can understand something and empathize with it does not mean that I agree with it at all. And that is one of the difficult things, with reality, is having to understand the things that are so unbelievably hurtful to you and harmful happen, and that they don't happen in a bad way, and that those things, that when they happen, there's good in it as well, and that is incredibly difficult to.
Or you can see good of it.
Yeah, well,
there's opportunity for you to alchemize.
Maybe, but it might not be your opportunity. It might be somebody else's. If, for example, if a lion kills a deer, that's not good for the deer, but that means that lion and that lion's family eats for the week. You know what I mean? They stay alive. But for the deer, there's no good in that at all. You can't even perceive that. That's it. You know what I mean?
What about a survivor of domestic violence? Like the person gets burned. Or survives extreme violence. In that case, they can make good out of it.
Yes, they can make good out of it.
But exactly. the act in itself was not.
The act in itself was not good. Exactly, it was not. That's exactly a good way of putting it, because it's you never want to. It's like they say, blame the player, don't blame the game. You know what I mean? Okay. You never want to blame reality for the mess that you're in, or you never want to blame the universe for the mess that you're in, or strike back at the universe. You can strike back at the forces that cause that to be, and you can say you don't agree with that or that, but you have to understand that on a universal level, it's not personal. You know what I mean? And that's and that also for me gives me a huge relief, a huge sense of relief, because sometimes when you get beat down, you don't want to feel like you're the only person getting beat down. It makes it more palatable and more tolerable if there's other people getting beat down.
But that's the basis of abusers, though. Like I have to like put that conversation there, that it makes it more palatable if you believe that we must all suffer in order for all of us to feel human, or for there to be common ground.
Yeah. I mean, I get what you're saying there, but I'm not necessarily saying that we should all suffer. But I do think, I think suffering is unavoidable in life.
Right.
I mean, that is one thing I will say. But if we could do as much as we could to not suffer, that's great. But I think it's, not putting harm on others is the most, as humans, that should be something that we should, fundamentally try and maintain no matter what, because it's something that can slip out very easily. And we know this because we're all humans, and we're all creatures, and humans have killed each other countless times again. But it's about understanding that we can coexist without these needless acts of violence. And I think what stops those things from happening is giving people more of vitality, more essential things that feel essential and that are not just for entertainment. Giving people things that they need to do as opposed to just things that they want to do. You know what I mean? Because it's that same. They did a study with chimpanzees where these chimpanzees were given everything. The jungles were filled with more than enough, fruit, vegetables, and wildlife to sustain them, like tenfold or something. And what ended up by happening is they started killing each other. And the reason why is because there wasn't that vitality of needing to go look for things. Mm-hmm. So now instead you're not wondering about how am I going to get food. You're wondering about who has the most food.
Right.
And that I feel like, and as it goes back to that same thing with presidencies and stuff, I feel like why it shouldn't be like that is we should be, if I've got food on my plate, get it to the next person. You know what I mean? That's how I feel like we should treat the system that we live in. Is if I'm okay, let's sort out the next person.
Right.
Do always make sure that you're okay before you start checking on other people, but don't, just worry about yourself and then never share that on, because it's where you would never be anywhere if your heroes, your idols did not do that for you, if they did not put their tools, how they did things out there for you to use.
So, I see that, and I want to say thank you so much. As you were speaking, I saw like labradorite in your eyes.
Thank you. I don't know what that is. But
it's an alchemical stone, so it's a precious stone. It's a wizard stone.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, so I saw that in your eyes, and it's like you were pulling from a very ancient wisdom within you in this conversation.
Definitely, I feel that as well.
I feel that as a person, you're very wise, and you're generous and humble and self-reflective, and I'm grateful for that.
Thank you. Not all the time, but I try my best.
No, but in the times that you are.
Thank you.
And I appreciate that in your embodiment, in your physicality, you've brought a sense of measuredness, peacefulness, ancient wisdom, wizardry, and like magic into this conversation.
Glad I could.
And placed it in the Akasha. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
I'm so happy that you came. Thank
it's
you.
A pleasure. I'm so happy. Thank you for having me. You really made my day.
You made mine too.
Thank you.
Cool. Chael made this amazing art, and I just want you to give me one sentence for each artwork. So this one.
Okay, so this first one is day and age, afraid or enraged. So it is describing our reactions to some of the brutal reality that we are forced to deal with today, without facial or mouth expressions, but just through the eyes, and yes.
And this one?
Minions' opinions. Now that is about the viewpoints and protest of the average and everyday citizen, and how we can come together and talk about it. But at the day, they do just become, we get bored to feel like we're minions and with just an opinion as opposed to, facts that we could actually use to make changes. This next one is stay inside. So this one is very much got to do with lockdown and the coronavirus and how governments dealt with it and how us as people found out about it and had to stay behind locked doors.
This is my favorite piece. So
this one is also probably my favorite as well. So this is Rulers' Rules. This is Rulers' Rules, and it's about, so the rules that dictators give over their people, or not necessarily even just dictators, but some leaders in general, which tend to not work in the favor of their citizens, but more work in the favor of their state. And then this last one is give back. So this one, whether you see it from up or from down, it is about, togetherness, supporting each other, the helping hands from one person to the next.
I love that because it takes a lot of different perspectives to see the full circumference of a baobab tree. It matters, our voices matter. So thank you for coming to this episode. Thank you for enjoying it with us. To more beauty and wisdom.
Thank you, Tatenda.